Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast. I am your host, Sarah Delavan, and as always, I'm joined by our producer, Chelsea Steer.
Hey, Sarah. So today we are bringing the audience a Building a Business on Your Own Terms episode.
BABOYOT.
Yes. And in staying with that theme, I wanted to start by highlighting one of our annual BABOYOT members, Emily Winston. So Emily is the founder of BOYOT Bagels. And you may remember Emily from episode 54 of this podcast. And I will say, if you live in the Bay Area, you definitely have heard of BOYOT Bagels.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone who likes to eat, especially bagels, isn't aware of BOYOT. And, we like to shout out our BABOYOT members here on the podcast as a thank you and to spread the word about these amazing brands and founders. But let's be honest, BOYOT Bagel does not need help. When you've got the New York Times saying that the best bagels in the country are in California, like the word is out. But, I do want to highlight Emily's work as a founder and the way that she has really truly been building a business on her own terms. And you can hear the full story in episode 54. But Chelsea, why don't you tell us a little bit about Emily and BOYOT?
Yeah. So Emily grew up in central New Jersey, and her dad actually worked in the city, right? And so the story is that he would always bring bagels and lox and things home from H&H Bagels. And she just thought, like, these are the best bagels in existence. And then after moving to the West Coast as an adult, she learned that H&H had closed, was no longer in existence, and that kind of put her on this mission to recreate this delicious treat from her childhood.
Yeah. And I love Emily's story so much. And I hope if you haven't listened to it in a while, or if you didn't listen to that episode of the podcast, it's called Building a Business on Your Own Terms with Emily Winston. Every step of the way, I think there are lessons to be learned from her journey and the process that she went through from, first and foremost, crafting the perfect bagel, right? She talks about how much time she spent on really getting it right and tasting it herself and having others taste it too. Her beginnings were as a pop-up, right? I believe it was in her own apartment, maybe at a friend's place, but really getting feedback and testing her product, right, with her potential, customer, running the numbers and truly understanding how much do I need to charge for this bagel and what does this model look like and how do I want to grow my business? She said no to retailers and distributors in the relative early days because she knew that it didn't make sense for her business at that time, all the way through how she is really operating a community funded business. Her first round of funding was done through email, if I remember correctly, and then on a more formal platform called SMBX after that, and I just encourage founders to listen to Emily's story. I'd actually love to get an update from Emily. Maybe we should reach out and see how things are going now, but she's growing, and it's very, very exciting to watch. And we're just honored to have her support of this podcast. As you mentioned, Chelsea, she's an annual BABOYOT member, and it means a lot to us that she's a part of our community and supporting the work that we do here.
Yeah, as a BABOYOT herself.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So we are going to we'll share a link to that episode 54 in the show notes, as well as link to BOYOT Bagel's website if you want to learn more about them. And if you want to learn more about becoming a BABOYOT member and having your brand featured here on the podcast as well, we'll include some information in the show notes, but you can always visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on membership.
Amazing. So, Chelsea, it is Monday, May 6th, and just about 2 weeks ago, there was some really big news about the sudden closure of Foxtrot Markets and Dom's Kitchen.
Yeah.
In Chicago. And there's a lot that we can learn from this story. And we're actually going to do a deep dive into sort of the rise and fall, if you will, of Foxtrot and how, as food brands and food businesses, we can, again, learn from that story and also avoid similar outcomes. So we're going to touch on this story today here in our new segment, really to point out some resources for folks, because we know that there are many founders that have been affected by this. And obviously it was a very sudden closing, there's a lot of financial repercussions
Yeah.
to brands and employees, right, and suppliers. So we want to just today say this is a big story for the industry. They had 33 locations across multiple states. There are a lot of brands and founders and businesses that are being financially impacted. There's a lot of product locked in stores that the brands are never going to get back, right? It's waiting for liquidation, if you will. There are a lot of products at distribution centers without a retail home to go to. And there's a lot of money lost that cannot be recouped because it was spent on transportation and getting new product to Foxtrot. I've even spoken to one founder who had just gotten new SKUs approved by Foxtrot, I believe in all locations, and had spent upwards of $14,000 in getting this product to the store. And what she said to me was, she's not mad about the closure, right? This
Yeah.
is a part of business, and we understand that nothing is forever, right? And there are risks in any partnership that you take on. But the fact that the new product was greenlit and then within days of shipping the product, the stores closed. That's, I think, is really stinging for her, and understandably so. So in light of that, and in light of all the different things that the various founders and brands are going through as a result of this sudden closure, we want to point to a couple of resources. So Chelsea, will you let people know what we're going to link to in the show notes and some of the other resources that we have?
Yeah, these show notes are going to be very valuable. It's turning out, but number one, we're going to link to some posts on Instagram where some brands and founders are coming together and collaborating, really in support of one another, right? And in an effort to find solutions and how do they move through this really devastating situation.
Yeah.
And then also, as one of the primary distributors, right, for Foxtrot or to Foxtrot, Pod Foods is making an effort to identify new retailers that serve like the same kind of customer that they can get these products into. And they've also, offered to get these brands' products out of their distribution centers into other distribution centers if that's what it takes to help get these products on shelf and in store. And so they're doing a lot of work as well. And they've talked about that on LinkedIn. So we're going to link to those posts on LinkedIn as well, so that if you are a brand that is being impacted by these closures, you have some resources and a place to go, to try to get some support.
Yeah. And as we said, we're going to share more about this story and what we can take away from it in our next episode here at the Good Food CFO podcast. But in this episode, we're hearing from Jeff Wiguna, the co-founder of Kuju Coffee, and how he and his co-founder are building a business on their own terms. Kuju Coffee was literally kickstarted in 2015 and debuted at Summer Outdoor Retailer in 2016. The brand soon became the go-to coffee for anyone on adventure as they landed nationwide distribution in REI, Sportsman's Warehouse, and numerous outdoor retailers across the US. Today, they are the leading single-serve pour-over brand in the US, built on the foundation of their outdoor roots. And Jeff and I actually met at an industry event here in LA, as you'll hear during the episode. And we immediately sparked a conversation about the way that he and his co-founder, Justin, built the company on their own terms without venture capital. He shares his very specific thoughts on venture investment and also talks a lot about what it means to have a healthy business.
Yeah, Sarah, I loved listening to this episode. I think that when we talk about building a business on your own terms, Jeff just embodies that so much, right? And in every aspect, between the channels that they've chosen, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that they have built the business over the last 9 years, slowly and intentionally, the way he talks about the importance of vision, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
that vision goes beyond just your business,
Yep.
but the vision for your life. Like
Yep.
all of those things are part of what it means to have your own terms, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really excited.
And I love that you point out that this has been a 9-year journey. When I read the highlights, right, people might think, oh my gosh, they're so big. They grew so fast. They must have gotten outside investment. They must have been profitable from day one. They're right. There are all these assumptions that sort of come along with these highlights that we read about a company, and those achievements and accomplishments should not be undermined at all. But it is so important, as Jeff shares, to know the real story, to understand what's going on underneath the hood, if you will, and to not just pay attention to the highlights, and also to build the brand that works for you. So guys, I'm really excited for you to hear this episode. So let's get to it.
Do you want more from the Good Food CFO? Join our newsletter. When you sign up for the Good Food CFO newsletter, you'll get updates from us about the podcast, what's happening in the Good Food CFO community, articles from the Good Food CFO herself, Sarah Delavan, and information about the free and low-cost resources that will support you in building a business on your own terms, all delivered straight to your inbox weekly. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com to sign up today. And now, back to the show.
Welcome to the podcast, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So a little bit of background for our listeners. You and I met at an industry event here in LA. And as you do at an industry event, the conversation of hey, what do you do happens. You so keenly were like, you don't look like a CPG founder. And I was like, I'm not.
That's a good start. You were dressed with a particular attention to how you were dressed. I think CPG founders tend to either dress very specifically as the brand, or a lot of the value is driven by the product and the inventory, not so much how you necessarily present yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Which obviously is part of it, but not the same.
Yeah. And that's funny. I didn't have any branded clothing at the time. I have since gotten some cute sweatshirts though, which I very much enjoy. But so that was very funny. It was a great way for you to strike up a conversation and flattering. But so then we pretty quickly got into the conversation of finance, and I can't remember the exact pathway to it, but you started to share some opinions with me and experiences with me where I was like, that we see eye to eye on a lot of things, but I come from the financial perspective, not the founder perspective. And one of the things we do here on the podcast is episodes like this, which are called Building a Business on Your Own Terms episodes. And it's great to have different voices in these episodes talking about how you've chosen, or maybe where you wanted to choose something and it didn't work out that way, right? But how you're building a business on your own terms in a way more specifically that aligns with how you want to grow and your debt and risk tolerance, which I think that's a really big thing for founders. So can we start out by just giving us a little bit of a background on your brand, how long you've been in business?
Yeah, I'm Jeff. I'm the co-founder, CEO of a coffee brand, or an outdoor coffee brand, depending on who talks about it, called Kuju Coffee. We're one of the original pioneers of the single serve pour over format in the States. My brother and I kickstarted the company in 2015, and we discovered the filter, and we had brought it on a camping trip and sensed, hey, this is actually really good for camping. At the time, we were in San Francisco, surrounded by the third wave specialty coffee movement, and the filter, single serve pour over filter, we thought was an incredible, inspiring, and fun way to deliver premium specialty grade pour over coffee experiences while you're camping.
Yeah.
And we kickstarted it, and that was successful. And I think we debuted 2016 at Outdoor Retailer. And then shortly after that, we were National and Sportsman's Warehouse. And then shortly after that, we launched an REI. And this was all before outdoor was kind of a big thing. So it was very niche. And fast forward to today, this is our 8th year in business. We are the leading coffee brand in the outdoor channel, with national distribution in all of the key retail outdoor chains, from Bass Pro, Academy Sports, REI. We're in Dick's Sporting Goods, Public Lands, and so forth. A number of independent outdoor retailers, as well as Whole Foods and Sprouts. So it's been a journey, but that's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell.
Okay. I have so many questions. I'm in my notepad here to make sure I keep them all organized. So I want to go back to the beginning a bit and talk about you kickstarting the company. So I think you're literally talking about having a Kickstarter campaign.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yep.
do you think that those are still or that kind of method of initial funding is a viable option for founders?
I okay. Well, we were in San Francisco, surrounded by a lot of tech innovation to begin
Yeah.
with, so it was very commonplace to test and iterate. At that time, Kickstarter, I think, was a different kind of platform, as in there were not as many options to iterate things through technology platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I think it still is, but I think there are many. Well, maybe the best way to answer it is Kickstarter for us was an excellent way to test our own chops.
Okay.
So it was not to gain market traction. It was not to raise $100,000 and then get all this press. It was very much to just see if we could do it. Can we fulfill? Can we do it on time? A lot of Kickstarters at the time were very delayed. We actually got ours all executed on time, and we also wanted to test the brand positioning. We didn't have any product back then. We just had fake prototypes. So it was really a marketing campaign, and we only raised $16,000, which went
Okay.
pretty far. We got sample materials. It helped us buy flights for a test trade show visit, and the most expensive thing we spent it on was $1,400 for a nitrogen and heat sealing machine from India, which felt very expensive. $1,400. That was such a big deal back then. And then when we received it, the nitrogen flushing didn't work,
Oh God.
which is kind of one of the first kind of crises that, but it's, so I think it could work depending on how you use it, though. You have to
Yeah.
understand your use cases for it.
I think that's such great advice. Yeah. And so from the very beginning, it seems that you knew your audience and you knew where you wanted or believed your product fit into sort of the greater coffee,
Yeah.
marketplace and who your audience was. And I think that that's something that some founders struggle with. I think your
Hmm.
product obviously like it makes sense to go
Hmm.
into that sort of outdoor arena, but can you talk a little bit more about the work that you did to identify the customer, to any of that
Hmm.
sort of like foundational sort of brand strategy and customer awareness work?
Yeah, that was also what the Kickstarter was for as well, because you will get those messages, you'll get some feedback. We launched the Kickstarter at a Kickstarter launch party inside a sports basement in San Francisco.
Oh, cool.
So it was very clear what position we were testing. And quite frankly, I think it worked out, and we haven't really changed it since. I mean, our packaging has iterated, but we've not gone through major revamps or rebrands that I think a lot of brands do and then need to tout. I actually find our packaging to be a little boring to me, but I think it has to be tiresome and boring to the people on the inside
Yeah.
in order
That's
for it to have the longevity on the outside. So it was,
I
yeah,
think that is such a great like sentence because I think oftentimes founders are like, "Oh, I'm so bored of this," right? Like we've had the same look for, X amount of time, but it really speaks to your messaging, right? What you're communicating. You should be tired of it because you've said it so many times in an effort to have your audience recognize you and really know like who you are and what you stand for. I
yeah.
absolutely love
I
that thought.
yeah, I think that might be the most. I actually think that's the arguably one of the most important things for a consumer brand outside of free cash flow and margin. So if we
Mhm.
just move those things aside, because I realized and learned the goal is not to do something new. The goal is to be something that is taken for granted and just is a part of people's world. Trees look the same all the time. French's mustard looks the same. Heinz ketchup looks the same, and you can imagine people working at Disney on brand. I mean, they see Mickey Mouse all the time. Just how tiring that might be to see it
Yeah.
all the time. But I've learned to appreciate that feeling as a sign of success because it means that you're building trust because people tend to trust consistency. And there's a lot of lack of consistency, I think, not just in consumer brands, but in markets as a whole.
Yeah.
So as much as you can provide consistency, which ties into free cash flow margin, you actually build quite a bit of IP and kind of brand goodwill, I think, with
Yeah.
everybody in the ecosystem, not just consumers, buyers, suppliers, etc.
Yeah, that's a great point too. So you get this initial 16,000, you're able to get some supplies, get some equipment that didn't work quite perfectly, at least at the start. Was your initial next step then to go where we got to get in store?
Yeah, yeah. I had come from a wholesale distribution
Okay.
set of work before this, and I kid you not, I think the vision was, hey, we should do this. The goal will be to get it into REI, and that
Okay.
was in 2016. I remember thinking that on the shuttle that was taking us from the Las Vegas airport to, we were going camping in Red Rocks, and I remember that very clearly. It was very, very clear, and I
Yeah.
think we've focused on that. We've consistently been wholesale focused since the beginning, and we still are. So
Yeah. Do you have a D2C channel? Do you sell your products online as well?
yeah, we do. We always have since the beginning. But I mean, the beginning of any new concept, this is not a category that was proven and we were improving it. We were actually introducing an entirely new subcategory to a big category, which was coffee, and introducing a little bit more brand and marketing to a use occasion that was actually typically very unsexy for coffee, which was mostly instant when you're traveling. Because at the time, what was sexy were really complicated brewing processes inside really expensive looking coffee shops. Today, we continue to do the same thing. And I think it's a question of how do you achieve operational excellence alongside customer depth and servicing them closely through proper processes and strategy, which is a much more cerebral thing than maybe the first 3 to 4 years of let's make the product. Can we make it? Can the buyer take it? Can we show them that we're serious? At this point, buyers know we're pretty serious. Most brands that are in consumer don't last 8 to 10 years, at least in a healthy fashion.
Yeah.
And it's much more of a question of how do we broaden this subcategory and this use occasion so that we can help different retailers capture that or monetize that part of the market for their stores
Yeah.
because it exists. It definitely exists, and we're kind of in a special position to be able to figure that out. So,
Yeah.
which is why I think folks like Sprouts and Whole Foods will work with us because we have a lot of special momentum inside a channel and a mental psychological segment that they don't typically have access to, which would be like the
Yeah.
outdoor consumer, outdoor enthusiast, and so forth.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of put a pin in that for a second. And I want to go back to a word that you said, healthy. Build a
Yeah,
healthy wholesale business. How do you and your brother, how do you define healthy for your
yeah.
business?
I would say healthy. You know, there are typical metrics to say financial health, good plan demand, and so forth. But I had to come to this realization and accept that most companies tend to be, whether we like it or not, to some extent, a reflection of the founders or the
Mhm.
founder. I really think a healthy company as a founder starts with a healthy personal foundation. You know, if you have a family, a healthy family rhythm, because these things are so intertwined. And once you figure that out, it should enable a healthy vision that is clear for what you want to build, that is applicable to both the company and your personal normal life.
Mhm.
So I think that's part one, which I think that's very difficult. I think most people don't actually achieve that. Even if they achieve a 20-year success on the company side, you know, divorce is kind of a common thing for founders. And then you kind of run to this question of was it all worth it?
Mhm.
So I think health and on the home front is really where it starts. But on the business side, it's much more abstract, I think. There's definitely important metrics like free cash flow, good projecting to profitability, good margins. But I think it's not that different from a healthy home. I think it's a collection of relationships of everyone trying to do things with varying priorities and
Mhm.
having enough relational trust that you can fix things as every quarter goes by. So maybe your margins are not that great, but you need them to be better for a specific year because maybe you're shooting for a type of line of credit. You need to have the relationships with your suppliers to be able to do that, or your customers to manage your pricing. Or maybe you need to do more innovation to freshen up the line, but it might impact the P&L in a different way. It still goes back to the relationships to be able to maybe adjust MOQs.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that is important is a lot of these things sound tactical in nature. Hey, we need this, we need this. But if you're building for the long term, you can clarify a 5 to 7 year strategy and how that pertains to the relationships and the ecosystem that you're working with, a lot of these things should be understood as incredibly strategic to the long-term health of the entire ecosystem that you're working in.
Yeah.
And so I think health has less to do with free cash flow and margin, even though they're very important. It has more to do with the ability for an ecosystem, family, or company to actually be radically agile per quarter, per year, because to last 10 years, you actually need a lot of agility. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
your free cash flow is not always going to be the same. You might not want strong margins because maybe you're entering a new channel. And so building with the vision to be ultimately strategically agile, I think, and being able to do that is what truly healthy is for a company or an ecosystem. And that applies to family, that applies to you as an individual, as a founder. And I would also caveat it's very difficult, which is why most companies can't do it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's so great that this idea of strategically agile, one of the things we talk about here on the podcast is like we've actually stopped talking about profitability because
Hmm.
people identify that as that number at the bottom of the P&L, right?
Hmm.
Which is not the be all end all for
No.
a business.
Yeah.
And it will, much like your cash flow or cash flow projection, right? And your margins, they're going to change over time depending on where you are in your business.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I love that you're pointing out this idea of having a 5 to 7 year plan so that, okay, our margins may be a bit lower now, but it's because we're entering a new channel and XYZ, right? Our margins are high now, but it's because we haven't yet, entered this
Yeah.
lower channel. And so I was just we did a profit assessment the other day with the founder. The position of their company right now in terms of cash, in terms of margin, is all very good.
Hmm.
But going back to the idea of health, right? They're doing everything. They're doing all of the work, right?
Hmm.
They can't focus on sort of that higher
Yeah.
level strategic marketing growth kind of stuff because they're in the production. So what
Yeah.
that means for their business, right? And when you take that strategic view of where do we want to be in 5 years, we've got to get that person replaced. And so
Yeah.
that they can really truly move into that CEO role. Well, that means that the expenses are going to change, right? There's going to be
Yeah.
some other changes. And so that margin, that profitability, the cash flow, how it looks today is going to change and it's not going to look the same in a
Yeah.
couple of months. But when you know that,
Hmm.
right, then you can know, okay, these are the outcomes we expected. This is, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Or we're on track, even though things look quote unquote worse,
Hmm.
because we know where we're headed and we're making these decisions and spending this money, if you will, for very specific
Yeah.
strategic
And
reasons.
I think that's and I'm also a pretty avid musician, and one thing I've heard is to think about, and I'll relate this, think about music horizontally. You're going from now to then,
Mm,
and not to think about it vertically, which is very much at this point in time. So I think thinking about business horizontally is very important because maybe you're okay with lower margins because you have a partner who's going to save you on logistics, which will support free cash flow all the same. It just depends on,
mhm,
on a lot of things. And I think that the health of the founders, it's their responsibility to take the time to be present enough to their situation in the company and the market to be able to suss out a strategic, I don't know if I would say strategic pathway, but a strategic landscape to
mhm,
understand where they can be most relevant and value driving for their stakeholders. Because you can have a clear strategic pathway that is blind to the strategic opportunities that are before the company. And I think high return on investment it's a requisite to be able to have the humility to hear what the market is saying to you,
Mm.
even if it's not what everyone else is doing. And so, in terms of doing it on your own terms, the worst thing is just to do what everyone else is doing. That's the absolute worst thing. And it's also the easiest thing. So,
Mhm.
by virtue, as an analogy, the best thing for the company can sometimes be the loneliest and the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's tough, because it's not just hard operationally, but you have to have this kind of personality who just you just don't care.
Yeah. And I think that takes practice too,
It
you
does. It
know?
does.
Yeah.
I
Kind of
would
going
agree with
back to
that.
the health, like, as a founder, not of a food business anymore, but just of our business, like moving my body, right? Like working out, acupuncture, therapy,
Uh-huh.
friends, all of
Yeah.
these things, time away from screens, like all of these things lend to personal health and sort of the ability to go, let me check in with myself. Am I doing this on my own terms? Am I doing it the way that makes sense for me and my brand and the
Yeah.
business, right? All of those things. And can I not compare? Can I not, look over and see what everybody else is sort of doing, in the industry? It reminds me of like when a new style comes out, like for a logo
Hmm.
in coffee in particular, there was that era of like the cross with like the four symbols or like letters in
Hmm.
it. Do you
Hmm.
remember that? It was like the
Yeah.
2010, 2012 kind of
I,
era. And
I
it's
do
like
remember.
literally everyone's like, it's like, guy, be original. Like no one's brand is
Yeah.
standing out on the shelf like with all the
Yeah.
same branding. It's just sort of a very simplistic
I,
kind of like, I
I
think,
do.
example of
Yeah, I do remember that.
sort of all
I,
blending in.
I think it's especially challenging in a very investor influence industries, because investors actually they don't actually think they want companies to do things that are radically unique,
Mm,
because it does not support portfolio diversity. You want everyone to do the same thing, and you want to be able to pick the one who's doing it the best.
yeah.
But if you're a founder, to some extent, it is actually okay to be very unappealing to an investor, because investors tend to they don't have all the data to build necessarily positive intuition that is founder friendly.
Hmm.
It's obviously positive towards return terms, but I think to build a strong, sustaining company, there's really no one else besides like the founders and like the core people who
Yeah.
have to. I read Arnold Schwarzenegger had said for Terminator 2, there's a scene in the bar when he walks in and steals someone's clothes that movie studio executives didn't like that scene. They wanted to kick it out. And then he had said, only a studio guy would want to kick that scene out. And I didn't really get what he meant, but I think for him as the actor working with James Cameron, the director, they probably understood the material and the narrative so deeply that they understood why that was such a critical scene. And I think it was one of the most memorable scenes for the film. But I think from a return and investor point of view, it's very difficult to pay attention to the craft and the art of a business. But that's usually where all the value is created. And so if you go down that pathway, you kind of have to just be okay with dealing with that. And I'm not saying investors are bad. I think they're great, and the good ones are excellent. But there is just the reality that there has to be a managed tension between, the movie director and the studio. And it can work. It can definitely work, but it can also destroy the
Yeah.
company if it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's a really great insight to share. And I also think that, like, I'm just going to kind of keep going back to this word health because,
Mhm.
you know, you have to have a certain level as the founder of trust in yourself, trust in your knowledge, trust in the fact that you do know the brand, and
Mhm.
trust to be able to say, like, listen, investor, like, you need to trust me here, right? Because for
Mhm.
them, anything that goes sort of off track, right? Like going, like using that movie example, I don't remember movie scenes in my head, so I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm gonna assume like they felt like, oh, that's weird, or there's something
Mhm.
that happens in that scene that felt risky to them, and they thought, statistically, that kind of a scene would turn
Yeah.
people off, right? So they're out of
Yeah.
context, they're seeing a risk, and they're
Yeah.
going, if we avoid that risk, then our outcomes as the investors in this project will be better. right? And
Yeah.
it was the makers that had to go, we understand where you're coming from and why you're saying that, but you need to trust us because it's there for a reason and it's going to make a bigger impact in a positive way than you
Yeah.
understand, you
Yeah.
know?
And I think there is a big question on what health is. It has to start with profitability, though. I think I've talked to enough founders and researched this enough that the stress level goes down dramatically if you have safe profitability forecasts. And then after that, you can actually take the time to suss out a truer vision and then have the mental space to discern the artistic components or the creative components that add a uniqueness to the company or the product. And then I also think health has a lot to do with longevity, which I'm not going to expand on unless you'd like me to, but I think it's a very holistic word that goes beyond kind of financial statements. But they're all tied together. Everything is very associated, which means like the financials are important, but they're not the only thing. And I think too much focus on the financials doesn't achieve the financial results, which
Yeah,
which is the irony of it. Yeah.
yeah, it's complicated. But I think the bottom line here is like it's complicated, right? Health is absolutely holistic. And I think you may have said it a moment ago. It's like I've seen this in my work when, as an example, we've taken a healthy company and said, okay, we are going to grow aggressively over this next year and
Hmm.
we're going to take on debt to do that. And we
Hmm.
understand that the way that this, and by debt, we mean like a loan, right? The way that money was going to be spent, it's going to hit the P&L. We're
Hmm.
going to be overspending on operating expenses and production labor compared to the revenue we're able to generate in the short term. In
Hmm.
addition to that, the founder also invested pretty heavily in some marketing that, long story short, didn't turn out the way that they wanted it to. But the point I'm trying to make is that during that time of growth, right, where we knew going into it, there were projections of
Hmm.
that loss on the P&L, right?
Yeah.
And there was a projection of like what cash was going to look like, and they agreed to it. Okay, let's do it. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's
Yeah.
going to be hard, right? It's not going to be easy, and we're hoping that it turns out similar to what our projections are.
Yeah.
And we got so far in, and their health, as you kind of hinted at, the stress level, the seeing those numbers, the real reality of how much money was in the bank account and how short the
Hmm.
cash runway had become was too
Yeah.
much. And so at a certain point they were like, I actually can't do this. I actually
Hmm.
can't do this, partly because of the numbers and the stress of the numbers, but also seeing that and checking in with myself. This isn't the direction that I want to go. And I
Yeah.
don't see a way that this makes me happy, that this is
Yeah.
the business that I want to run. And so we kind of got there and it became this very unhealthy moment, right? Very difficult financially, difficult emotionally. And then
Hmm.
through that, decisions were made to go, let's change this around.
Hmm.
We're going to actually make a strategic change and take a different
Yeah.
path, which is fine, right? But it's to say that like you can have all the information at your fingertips and
Yeah. And it still doesn't parse out the way that you thought it would.
yeah,
Is that?
or that you're like, okay, I know what I'm getting into, and
Yeah.
it's okay to kind of get there and then go, I'm actually not okay, because you don't know until you
Yeah.
go through it, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's just to say like it's not totally reliant on the numbers, but it is holistic. Nothing in your business, in my opinion, happens in a vacuum.
Hmm.
Everything is connected, and
Yeah.
you could say the sort of the mental, physical, emotional health of the founder can affect the financial outcomes and vice versa.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The interesting thing I have found about business is it's actually highly formulaic.
Mhm.
It's not, I think it's challenging for founders mostly because founders tend to be of a certain age range and you can only be in that age range once. And there's a lot of things that you're learning. But once you figure it out, because I'm in LA, I reference movies a lot, but it's not that different from creating a movie. It's incredibly challenging. There are a lot of issues, but every movie has a formula. And I think the when that formula is executed with clarity of vision and true artistic confidence, it actually can work. The reason I bring that up is because I don't think healthy for a company needs to be a foreign concept. Because if you do enough research, speak to enough founders, You can over time kind of find the patterns of the formula, which ultimately somewhat points to, and this is maybe a controversial statement, that success in business may not be fully attributable to luck.
Yeah.
It might be more attributable to familiarity with the formula and adaptability of your given formula per your category. I think if you think about that, very, very few people are privy to understanding the true equations that exist inside an industry or category. And I don't just mean business, product, pricing, but I also mean cultural behaviors, social currency for networking, certain looks that are formulated, like that are associated with trust, and even the formulas that exist around how industries and categories evolve over time.
Hmm.
But if you're able to not be too overly swamped with the operations of the business and identify that, it actually, to some extent, becomes very easy to do. But I may be speaking too far ahead of. I think a lot of people in CPG are maybe in year 2 or 3, trying to just learn how to make a product. But my point is, even with that, it's formulaic. It's just very
Hmm.
hard to learn it because no one has incentive to share the formulas, so to speak,
Hmm.
because it's a private market. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that I don't know
Yeah.
if that's helpful, but I thought that was important to share.
Yeah, I mean, it's all valuable and interesting. I think you're right. The beginning is about figuring out how to make a product, and I guess I have strong opinions about not going too far too fast. Right? If you're in
Hmm.
the phase of figuring out how to make your product and deliver it, and maybe I know a lot of founders don't have as clear a vision from day one about how
Hmm.
their product is being used by people and who their consumer is specifically, like you did. And so you're also kind of figuring that out in the beginning. And it's like if you try to run into distribution quicker
Yeah.
than before you're ready to me, that's sort of breaking the formula a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
I think part of it is absolutely what you said, but then also sort of knowing, where am I
Hmm.
in the process, in the life of my business?
Yeah.
Don't compare yourself to another brand that is in your category, because you don't want to be exactly the same as them, as we pointed out
Hmm.
before, and B, like, you have to do things on the time that's right for your business. You
Yeah.
might not, your product may be hopefully unique for very specific reasons. We speak to good food brands here, which means, sustainable or regenerative sourcing, really earth, environment friendly, right? Paying fair wages across the sales channel, or
Yeah.
the supply channel. All of those things take time to figure out. And
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
there's benefit in, taking your time, figuring it out, and then mapping out. Because I think too, the formula can be a bit different when it comes down to like that numbers piece, right? It's like,
Hmm.
okay, I do want to talk about cash flow. I do want to talk about profitability. I do think that those things are important. Do I think they're going to I don't think profitability exists every month throughout the
Hmm.
life of the business, nor should it. It's just not a possibility. But cash flow is extremely important, and making decisions based on, where am I? Where are the numbers in my business? What do I need to improve or change strategically before I move forward and take that next step into the sort of the next
Hmm.
strategic phase of my business is so critically important, because
Yeah.
what I see day in and day out is moving too fast, spending more money than they need to rush into the next phase of the business before
Yeah.
you're ready, and that results in simply running out of cash or being worn out
Yeah.
physically and then mentally and emotionally because of the financial situation.
Yeah. I agree completely. I was radically tired probably in year 6 and 7, and so I had to find a way to re-energize just not even my head, my brain, just my entire being.
Yeah.
If I were to say anything that was maybe much more pointed, I would say patience as a virtue is very much accepted as a positive thing in life in general, in
Hmm.
relationships and family, in spousal relationships and friendships. But for some reason, and it's seen as an asset. That's really important. Patience, to say, oh, they're a very patient person, is a great compliment as a parent, but it's not seen as a compliment as an entrepreneur or a
Hmm.
founder in the CPG space. And I think there's a huge problem with that, because patience is how you can thus hear the right consumer insights. It's how you can
Yeah.
create more demand for your product, because more pull. Because if you're just
Yeah.
pitching all the time, That's not interesting. So I would, if healthy relationships are defined by ample amounts of patience, I think a healthy company, healthy ecosystems, it's worth pondering for any listeners here. How is patience an asset for how you run your company? And if it's not, it might be reflective of the health of a relationship where patience is also absent. Which, if you think about that, if there's no patience within an interpersonal relationship, it's very likely it's a transactional relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we hang out because I pay you and da da da, and that's fine. But generally, companies like that don't have the culture or character to achieve longevity because patience is just so tantamount to make it through various kinds of seasons. And I
Yeah.
don't mean patience to say, hey, we're going to go slow, be patient. I even mean patience for we have a giant initiative, we just invested a lot of money. You need inter patience to just see it come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
Like 2 to 3 years is not a long time for a giant initiative. That's how long it takes to enter a market, not even succeed. So
Yeah.
I think when I go to Expo West, the thing that is the most exasperating for me is the what feels like a deep and almost culturally bankrupt lack of value of patience. And that's because it is most friendly to founders to be patient. There's no room for patience if you're managing investment portfolio
Mm-hmm.
by definition of the terms.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work like that. So I would highly encourage people to think about how can you make patience an asset in your business, and maybe not in every department, but certainly at least maybe in one department, and then see how that stands out because that's been a wonderful asset for us as I've pondered that and seen that. And it's given me, actually, I'll maybe share this too. It's given me the insight to create a vision for the next 10 years for the company,
Mm.
which is to ask how can we use our outdoor industry contacts, our outdoor industry relationships, and brand and commerce to actually support bringing children in the foster system into the outdoors. And that's the kind of vision that doesn't come when you're trying to move as quickly as possible,
Mm-hmm.
nor is it something that you build quickly. It's a very complicated interwebbing of different kinds of organizations.
Yeah.
Once I clarified that vision, it has provided an incredible amount of fuel, momentum, energy, and social momentum for our community to crystallize like why we exist. And
Yeah.
once you achieve that, everything kind of locks in,
Yeah.
but it takes a long time. Hence patience. So
So I want to dive into the sort of investor funding kind of space. One of the things you were very clear
sure.
about when we first met was that you've not taken like VC or investor funding. And I believe, are you fully self-funded?
We took a friends and family round back in
Okay.
2018. It was less than a million, but for all intents and purposes, in terms of the field that we play on, we're, I guess you can say, organically grown. But I don't know, bootstrapped or self-funded or all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it a decision that you made early on, or was it something that you kind of thought about and decided on a case by case basis whenever you needed, to
Um,
make a big decision?
I just didn't know people ever built companies with the intention to sell, actually.
Mm,
I just didn't know that was a thing.
right.
So from the very beginning, I just thought you just start a company and you build it and it gets big. that's that's
And it's
just what
yours.
I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
I really didn't know. But I'll do a shout out. It was when I got connected to an organization called the Tugboat Institute, which is an org for companies and CEOs that are committed to non-institutionally financing growth. It was a guy named Dave Wharton, and he did this presentation called Moment of Divergence. And he talked about how the venture community started, and it worked for certain things. But he also talked about how Microsoft and Amazon had not taken venture in their very, very early days,
Hmm.
which is ironic because they're kind of seen as like, build fast and grow fast, but that's not entirely true. And so once he outlined the statistics on actual financial returns over X amount of time periods for venture driven companies, I don't think any founder would go into it at an early stage of their company understanding the probabilities that they will actually make something from it.
Yeah.
I think if you've been doing it for 10 years and you're a healthy 15, 20% EBITDA and you're stable and you know what you're about, yeah, and you're ready for it, sure. But I think there's a lot of companies that take on the venture path without understanding the nuances of it. And I'm fortunate to some extent to have not gone into that direction, or both not really ever leaning into it. I've dipped my toes into it a couple times, so I know a number of people in it, but the best venture capitalists that I've ever met who are honest, caring for the founder have told me don't raise venture.
Right.
And it was very hard for me to understand why these people were telling me that. And they had money and they're like, Jeff, just don't do it if you don't need to do it. And even the best founders that I know have always said, if you don't need to do it, don't do it. And they're not saying it from a place of righteousness. They're saying it more from like a pretty serious standpoint.
Yeah.
But I think it's because the reality is social and economic mobility in the country are driven by not salary earning. It's driven by the amount of assets and securities and equity that you own, whether it's stocks, real estate, or your
Yeah.
own company. So at some point, if you have a truly profitable entity inside your P&L, maybe it's really messy. It tends to be messy in the beginning. Let's just say 51% is owned by you. If you can manage the profitability and be very patient with it over a 10-year timeline, the financial gain to you as a 51% shareholder plus the autonomy of owning control is essentially probably closer to the American dream than owning a house with a mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is investors who make tons of money because they own equity don't benefit when the people they want to buy equity from know that.
Yeah.
So and I don't say this in a prideful sense, but I in the last year I have a much healthier relationship with my wife and my two kids because we've said, hey, we're just gonna really focus on profitability over time. I went on a Disney cruise after Expo West and I forgot Expo West had happened when I got back until I saw all the booth pictures on LinkedIn and I was like, I don't want to see any of this. I'm just operating. I don't want to know anything.
Yeah.
And it's not an arrogance. I think I have friends who have done the VC route and they're phenomenal, like excellent. But those are people who are very prepared to do that route and they have very high acumen. My argument is just that it's mostly the social economic mobility is driven by holding on and owning equity that increases in value over time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're 30 and you're starting your company, if you build it for 20 years, it will be extremely challenging for 10. But maybe by the time you're 50 and you're pulling in 400,000 free cash flow, and you can take a 200,000 distribution per year, that to me is more meaningful than having been part of a unicorn exit, which usually doesn't make anybody rich. It's the companies that have been sold when you own 80% of it,
Yeah.
and you sold it for $2 million that changes kind of your life.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for any founder to understand that.
You've talked about the importance of cash flow and
Mhm.
profitability. And I love to get insights from founders when they're here on what is the work that you do
Mhm.
around like your forecasting and your cash flow, and what are like important points or things that you think founders need to know around this work
Yeah,
and how
yeah.
important it is to do.
I think the first one is, you can't have a fun basketball game if you're not keeping a really clear score. So you have to know what the score is all the time. And you have to know what quarter you're in. You got to know how many fouls you have. Like, you have to know all the financials. And if you can't do that, you need to have somebody probably like yourself who can help you with the modeling and like updating it and so forth. I think the next thing is to always understand which budget allocation line items in your business drive protectable value for your customers.
Okay.
That's very difficult. I think so for us. It's not so much the coffee because coffee itself is a commodity. It's other things which I'm not gonna share, but
Mm-hmm.
but understanding which line items on your P&L drive customer value. That's maybe the most important thing. And then thirdly, just understanding that it's not about the numbers as much as it's about the relationships. So if you find that you're paying too much for shipping or you need something else, if you don't feel that you can send a human being an email or make a phone call to a human being to say, hey, can you help me lower this number? This is going to screw up my cash flow. You haven't done the true work of business. Business is not, I've never found it to be about transactions. It's really about just people trying to help each other. And you do, because you can't do it by yourself. So having the relationships and understanding that things inside relationships are adjustable, but things within terms and agreements are not. So you definitely want to sign agreements, you want to sign terms, be clear, but it's more important to have the rapport in the relationship of truth, honesty, and problem solving, because that's just kind of what it really is about. So between knowing your customer value, knowing all the data, and understanding that you have a human being that you can call behind every single line item, as long as you have someone of financial acumen kind of giving you the landscape of what ideally can happen, you could probably make it work. Those three things, however, are not the things most people focus on. They're focusing on the packaging and the distribution and so forth. But it's just people. It's just people. And if you fake it till you make it, no one's going to help you because you're faking it. If you're real, then people will always be willing to help you. And so that's kind of how I think we've approached those is probably what it boils down to in terms of what's valuable for cash flow.
Yeah. This has been such a lovely conversation. I think I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but I won't. I won't do that too. I know you've got important things that you need to move on and do in your day, but I just want to say thank you again for your time. I think it's a valuable conversation and just so much insight to share. I'm just really grateful for your time.
My pleasure, Sarah. Happy to chat with you. It's also enjoyable for me as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. Will you share your website and where people can find your product and potentially you if they're interested?
You can find Kuju Coffee, Sprouts, Whole Foods, REI, Bass Pro Academy, Cabela's, Sportsman's Warehouse, PCC markets in the Seattle area. And if not, kujucoffee.com or find us on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you again, Jeff. Have a great day.
Thank you. See ya.
Want to hear more? When you support the Good Food CFO podcast through your BABOYOT membership, you'll get access to our archive of bonus clips, including 2 exclusive conversations from this episode. Just click the link in the show notes or visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on podcast bonus clips.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.